What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Babygirl and why I think the film failed to say anything of substance. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching this movie yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. Babygirl is an American erotic thriller film written, directed, and produced by Helena Rand. The film stars Nicole Kidman as a high-powered CEO who puts her career and family on the line when she begins an affair with a much younger intern, played by Harris Dickerson. Sophie Wilde and Antonio Banderas also star. Babygirl premiered at the 81st Venice International Film Festival on August 30th, 2024, where Kidman won the Volpe Cup for Best Actress, followed by a premiere at the 2024 Toronto International Film Festival on September 10th of 2024, with a wide theatrical release by A24 on December 25th of the same year. The film has received positive reviews and became a box office success, grossing $64.3 million on a $20 million budget. It was also named one of the top 10 films of 2024 by the National Board of Review, where Kidman was also awarded the Best Actress prize. Now, at the time of the making of this video, the movie has a 76% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 254 critic reviews, with its popcorn meter currently sitting at 48% based on over 1,000 ratings. The film has a Metascore of 79 on Metacritic based on 55 critic reviews, with a user score of 5.5 based on almost 150 user ratings. And finally, the film has a 6.0 out of 10 on IMDb with almost 50,000 ratings. So I heard about this film a while back, and that it was supposed to be super erotic. And that's why I was kind of surprised to hear that Nicole Kidman was going to be playing the lead role in this film, a role like this at this stage in her career. But, look, I figured she wouldn't sign up for something like this if she didn't believe in it, so I didn't think much more about it than that. But I didn't have a chance to get out to the theater when the movie was released due to me preparing to film my own feature film here later this year. You all keep your fingers crossed for me on that one. It's been a time so far. So even though I was still somewhat skeptical, ultimately I just made a mental note to make sure and circle back when I had a chance and see how the film turned out. But then I heard that the film was named one of the top 10 films of 2024. And I thought to myself, damn, the movie must have been better than I thought initially. And that, I'll admit, made me want even more interested in seeing it. Long story short, it took some time, but I did recently have a chance to watch it finally, and to see what all the fuss was about. Now, Rami, a middle-aged woman who's pretty successful in her career, but severely damaged as a person, specifically in the way she processes sex and her sexuality. And you can see that right out the bat, right? When the film starts, she's having sex with her husband, but as soon as he finishes, she dashes into the other room to watch adult content and essentially finish herself off. So, when she meets Samuel, a mere intern at her company, she seems immediately taken with him, supposedly all because he was the one intern bold enough to ask her a question when she met with the group. And I guess because she saw he was able to tame a rambunctious dog on the street, I guess that's supposed to be symbolic of his perceived capability to tame the wildness in her. But we'll come back to that. Plus, the other women at the company seem to gravitate towards Samuel for no discernible reason, right? because if you're watching the film and you're looking at this guy, what he looks like, the way he's dressed, and just kind of how he comes off, you just kind of go, I don't get it. But okay. She even notices that Samuel has the attention of Esme, a lower level female employee at the company, and she doesn't really seem to like it very much, right? So after some light flirting, a few days, and Samuel coming right out and telling Romy in a private meeting that he thinks she likes to be told what to do, Romy essentially makes a move on Samuel, not the other way around, right? He does kind of guide her to the moment, but she's the one who takes the bait, right? And after that happened, Romy immediately takes her family to what I'm assuming is their second home outside the city, where Romy's daughter, Isabel, ends up, spending time with a young girl who lives next door named Ophelia, behind the back of her supposed partner, Mary, which will end up being important. So keep that in mind. Now, after Romy gets back from the second house, in the country house, as you will, everybody meets at a restaurant after work. And it's here that, again, Esme wants to talk about being promoted, right? But that's not the thing that will stick out in your mind about the scene, because it's at this point where we get the infamous glass of milk that Samuel ordered for Romy, that she ends up drinking in front of all of her coworkers, and everyone else who works at the office, in a restaurant after work, right? And this is a major turning point in Samuel and Romy's relationship, because it basically is her consenting to being humiliated by him, right? For all intents and purposes. And from there, Samuel essentially lives rent-free in her head, to the point that she leaves her husband's play, he's a director, early to go and pleasure herself to the thought of Samuel, until he cleverly and rather confidently maneuvers her into meeting him at a motel room. I believe it's the motel room where he lives. All the while with her explaining over and over and over again to him that his behavior around the office is, as she puts it, out of line. But as soon as she gets there, my man Samuel gets all fidgety again, like he doesn't really know what to do next. But this was a pivotal scene because the power struggle between the pair is highlighted and even explained to a degree, which I actually, didn't have an issue with. Sometimes you just got to hit the nail on the head, right? Eventually, though, Samuel very clumsily gets Romy to bend to his will, and from there, we're officially off to the races. Now, things, go swimmingly for the pair for a while, right? Which is to be expected in a film like this. Act 2 is the promise of premise, right? So here we get the fun and games in the B story, which is basically them, going through this relationship that they have. And so, all that's done by the book, pretty much. We get a bunch of brief scenes and montages documenting the couple's ever-evolving relationship. And Helena Rain also throws in a short scene with the family all happy and go-lucky for good measure, really for contrast. Because in the very next scene, my man Samuel feels comfortable enough to show up at the country house, right? And in this scene, the family meets him, that being Romy's husband, Jacob, and her kids. They even seem to kind of hit it off with him enough to want him to kind of stick around and, enjoy the day with him. And this is the thing that seems to give Romy pause, because, for the first time, she truly feels vulnerable because Samuel is starting to become more and more unpredictable, right? And that makes Romy feel like her behavior may come with the cost at some point. Now, I want you to keep that in mind. And, the argument that the pair have at the end of said day in Romy's car about Samuel showing up at the country house is kind of meant to explain how important Romy's family is to her, which would lead one to think that at some point her behavior will cost her family in one way or another. I want you to keep that in mind as well. But she tells Samuel that they have to stop seeing each other, and this seems to irritate Samuel, even though he claims he doesn't want a girlfriend. She also explains that she's not going to fire him, which seems to not only confuse Samuel, but kind of anger him, especially since in his mind, it's he who has all the power, and that he's always had it. Because, in his mind, he can make one call to HR and he can mess some things up for her, quite badly, right? So, in response to the supposed breakup, if you want to call it that, Samuel explains to Romy that he doesn't feel comfortable working for her anymore, and this is back at the office, that he wants to be switched to another department. And here, he's just continuing to play the game, right? This is all manipulation to try to regain the upper hand in the situation after the blowout at the country house. And Romy tells him that he can't do that because the people at the company will investigate, that they'll ask questions, and that she could be fired. But Samuel insists, and he walks away, leaving Romy feeling, again, extremely vulnerable in a way that she's not used to. And, from here, we see Romy and her husband in bed again. And this is a scene that at this point we've seen, 2 or 3 times. It's the anchor point in the film, right? The scene that allows you to gauge exactly how Romy's marriage is doing, as the narrative progresses, right? But this time, instead of simply sleeping with her husband and then going to watch adult content, instead of trying to get him to be more adventurous in bed like the previous iteration of this scene, she simply gets angry at him for trying to initiate sex, explaining that she's never had an orgasm with him, which seems to catch him completely by surprise, right? They've been married for almost 20 years, I believe. It might even be a little bit longer than 20 years. I don't remember off the top of my head, but that's a long time to have no idea your wife has never had an orgasm. But okay. Because therein lies the rub, right? The reason she's screwing around on her husband in the first place. And I can appreciate the fact that her recent behavior is a product of something that may, at least in part, be relatable to a lot of people, right? I thought that this was the only choice to be made here by Rain, given what she's shown us to this point. Because if the husband was good in bed, and as we've heard her say, she really cares about her family, then her behavior would be difficult to explain to us, the audience. And as the writer of the script, you don't want that, right? So from there, Romy tracks Samuel down at his side job, as a bartender at a bar, the same bar that he explains to Isabel when he was at the country house that he works at as a side job, right? So way to plug the restaurant or the bar and then show it to us, salute to you. But Samuel responds by enlisting a fellow bartender to ask Romy to leave. The next day, Romy's husband asks if she meant what she said, about not having an orgasm the whole time they've been together. And she responds by telling him that she was just taking her anger out on him, that she didn't really know what she was saying at the time, right? Now, at work, she meets with Samuel, who asks her if she wants to lose everything. He asks in the private meeting if she's using him to essentially blow her life up, that the thought of that scares him, right? Now, Romy explains that she doesn't want that, but that because of his age, she also doesn't want to hurt him. Now, Samuel explains, that he's okay, that he thinks she's the one that's hurting. He then tells her that what they're doing is about giving and taking power, and that as long as what they do is consensual, that it'll all be okay. He then tells her that if they are to continue their relationship, that they need rules, first among them being that she will do whatever he tells her to do. Now, Romy seems uncomfortable with that notion, but after Samuel threatens again to ask to be transferred to another mentor, she ultimately agrees. A little because she likes what's happening, but mostly, I think, because she's afraid not to at this point, right? It's a pretty decent mixture of the both of them, and I think that both of those things are important, given what we've seen so far and where the narrative can go from here, right? So they do the whole hotel thing some more, but this time dressed nicely and in a nice swanky little suite, right? Samuel instructs her to do things like take off her dress and her underwear and open her legs so he can see. She reluctantly does these things, and Samuel stands before her naked body and he hugs her, calling her his baby girl. And this is where you get the name of the film from. I think the name of the film is fitting, given, how this all is laid out. So, good job there. And it's at this point where, if you ask me, her consent feels wildly coerced. But I think that's the point, right? We're past the midpoint, so the bad guys, they are closing in for sure, right? Metaphorically speaking, of course. Now, Samuel then takes off his shirt and does a little dance for her as she sits wearing a nice robe, and we hear Till the End of Time by George Michael. I didn't really like this song here, though I understand why it was chosen. Like, I get it. I've, had to choose songs for my own film, and sometimes they fit exactly what you want and sometimes not quite, and you still got to, you got to pick something. So, I'm okay. Now, they discuss a safe word, which ends up being her Romy's husband's name, which I think was wildly disrespectful. But, I guess what he don't know won't hurt him, for now. Um, Now, Romy drinks milk from a saucer off the floor. Yes, like a cat. And then the two have sex. And after they lay in bed and talk for a while, it's at this point that Samuel kind of allows himself to be a little vulnerable with Romy, asking if she can kind of give him some therapy. And basically, he asks her if she thinks he's a bad person. Now, Romy says no, but then he explains that sometimes he scares himself. Romy explains that she's not afraid of him before asking him what his star sign is. Just like a woman would, right? He laughs and says, I don't believe in that shit. And you can tell that she thoroughly enjoyed her experience with Samuel. Her time with him is meant to be a mirror opposite of the intimate time she spends and has spent with her husband. And that's the whole point. So, gold star in that department, right? Now, we next see Romy throwing a birthday party for Isabel. And we know that because, a few scenes before this, when the husband asked if she meant what she said about not having an orgasm, he also asked if she had gotten Isabel's headphones for her birthday. But you could be kind of confused because it's also Christmas time. There's a Christmas tree up in the house, so you kind of go, okay, but it's Isabel's birthday. And Samuel shows up with Esme, which completely catches Romy off guard to the point where she secretly questions, what he's doing at the party with her. He explains to Romy that he and Esme see each other from time to time. And Romy gets real upset before he reminds her that she's married. So she's kind of got no cause to be, playing a jealousy card. She explains that she doesn't want him seeing other women, that he is hers alone. And at that point, Esme happens to walk in and ask if everything's okay before the pair leave Romy to clean up the mess that's been made because of the party. Now, back at the office, Romy goes so far as to warn Esme against the relationship that she has with Samuel, stating that she's his superior, which is super hypocritical, but I digress. And at that moment, she gets a call from Samuel as Esme is sitting in the room demanding to see her later. She tells her husband that she has to work late, and she goes to a club to meet Samuel. Now, she looks completely out of her element at said club, right? Looks like she hadn't done any dancing like this probably in 20 years, but eventually she does find Samuel and the pair dance and make out before sneaking off to a dark corner at the club. And Samuel kind of compares himself to a cuckoo bird, stating that they lay eggs in other birds' nests, essentially sowing and creating chaos. And Romy asks if he does the same things with Esme that he does with her, and he explains to Romy that his relationship with Esme is different because Esme is not like her. And, you wonder if that's supposed to be a good thing or a bad thing, right? But, he doesn't necessarily go into detail there. Now, after the club, Romy sneaks into the house to find Isabel still awake, and Isabel claims to be worried about her. But she reassures Isabel that she's okay, and the next morning, Esme shows up during breakfast, and the pair sit down and talk about how disappointed Esme is and how Romy has handled her wish to be promoted. Now, Romy explains that they can talk about her promotion now, but Esme doesn't want her to make promises out of fear. And she goes on to explain that she knows all about Romy and Samuel, but that she only wants what she deserves. She then tells Romy that she is to stop seeing Samuel, and that she is to be a good leader, that she will create more opportunities for women within the company, and that she will be a good example and role model for them all. Now, after that, once Romy's husband comes home, she explains that ever since she was a little, she's had dark urges, these dark thoughts, right? And that she would do anything to get rid of them because she sees herself as this smart woman in control and that she wants to be a good person, but that she's not. Her husband, confused, asks what she means, and she continues on saying that she just wants to be normal, that she wants to be the kind of woman that he would like. He then asks her to be more specific about what she's trying to tell him, and she goes on to finally tell him the truth, that she has cheated on him. But she follows that up with lies, telling him that he doesn't know the man she cheated with and that it only happened once. And she then explains that with her, there has to be danger, that there has to be something at stake for her to be, turned on, but that's over now. Now, Jacob, her husband, continues to ask who it was and what he did to her. But she won't tell him, claiming that it doesn't matter because it's not about them. Jacob explains that there is no excuse for her behavior, that she can't put it on her parents or her childhood. He explains that he doesn't want to hear about her fantasies because she has placed her family and their children, most importantly, in danger and at risk. You know what I mean? And he ends his tirade by demanding that she leave the house before he storms out of the room. So she goes to the country house, the good old country house, right? But is awakened by Samuel outside swimming in the pool. Now she rushes outside in her nightgown and tries to get Samuel to leave, but he pulls her into the water instead and the pair make out. And from there, we see the two of them inside talking. And as they're talking, Jacob shows up and engages Samuel in a fist fight while Romy tries desperately to break it up, right? And after the two men wrestle around for a while, Jacob explains to Samuel that Romy abused him. Samuel explains that he's mistaken, that he's using an outdated view of sexuality, that he doesn't understand he and Romy's relationship. And I bet that pissed him off. Because at that moment, Jacob has a panic attack. And ironically, Samuel has to kind of care for him in that moment while Romy just stands there kind of looking. And Samuel apologizes to Jacob for the trouble he caused, and then he leaves the house. Now next we see Esme making a video praising Romy as an example for herself and all the women at the company. So we see that she's gotten her promotion because she's now doing the job that Romy had been doing up until this point. And it's not really clear if Romy's like on a sabbatical, if she's just taking time off and Esme's filling in for her, or if Esme permanently has the position and now Romy is just going to, find something else to do. The film is not real, solid about that. But I mean, that's a small point, so it doesn't really matter. Meanwhile, Romy spends time alone at the country house. And I suppose, like I said, that Esme is just filling in for her, even though the job could be permanent because we don't really get to see how that all shakes out. So we can just assume. But Isabel shows up and begs her mother to come home, explaining that her dad needs her, that he won't leave the theater, that he won't eat, and that he's been constantly reading the Bible. And Isabel tells her mom that her dad will forgive her, just like Mary forgave her for cheating with Ophelia in the pool. Remember back in the first act when they first went to the country house. So Romy goes to the theater and apologizes profusely to Jacob, accepting the blame for all that has happened. We then see her back at work, and Sebastian, a man that we saw earlier in the film, comes in and asks about Samuel specifically, claiming that he heard he took a job at Kawasaki before asking Romy if she had anything to do with that. It's almost as though he knows what happened between them, right? He then invites Romy to come to his house for drinks, that he has the house to himself, as though they may have done something like that before, right? But this time, Romy tells him to F off. She explains that she's not afraid of him, what he's capable of, or what he knows, and that he should never talk to her like that again. She then explains that if she wants someone to humiliate her, that she'll pay someone to do it before imploring him to get the F out of her office. And we then see Romy and her husband having what looks like tantric sex in their loft bedroom. And I guess she finally orgasms with him, so oh, happy day, right? And we also see Samuel in the motel room that he lives in with the dog he's domesticated. So I guess that's supposed to signify, just like when he kind of, got the dog to calm down on the street, this is supposed to signify that Romy has now been tamed, I suppose. That wildness inside of her has been kind of, abated. I don't know. But, fine symbolism. Okay, yay, writer. Now, the first thing that stuck out to me was the casting of Samuel, right? I wasn't particularly fond of Harris Dickinson in this role. Not that that's his fault, right? I don't think he had the right look for the role. And I think someone like Jacob Ellery would have been better, if I'm being honest, of Euphoria fame, right? But it wasn't just the casting. It was also the way that the character was written and the way he played the character, as well, right? I thought the character was way too timid for the role that the character played in the story. He came off as clumsy and unsure at times, especially in the beginning. And that just didn't play for a guy who clearly was trying to get with Romy. And as you saw some of the other shit he got up to in the film, it just made his character in the first act especially far too timid for what was taking place. Because, every time you turned around, there was a chick in his face. And you just kind of go, that's just not, I know I ain't no, dating expert or whatever, but, timid guys, every girl in the office was just in his face nonstop, like all of them. Like literally he could have smashed like 5 or 6 chicks during this movie. I also thought that the scene with Esme insisting on being promoted and that Romy stopped seeing Samuel should have been more direct and more pronounced. I mean, was she threatening Romy or not, right? In one breath, she's telling her that she has no interest in bringing her down, and then in the very next breath, she's demanding that Romy stop seeing Samuel. And my question is, or what? If Esme isn't going to tell on Romy, then what would be the leverage that she would use to get Romy to comply with either of her demands, right? I mean, I suppose the promotion could happen because Esme deserves it, but as far as, stop seeing Samuel, you kind of go, well, if you're not going to tell on me, then what would make me do that, right? Now, this scene also leaves us with a big question mark as it pertains specifically to Esme as a character, right? We don't really know how to feel about her because we don't really know her. Right, it's always hard to get to know side characters because they don't appear in a whole lot of the film. So they got to kind of make their presence felt in these quick spurts, because in order for you to know how to feel about them, you got to kind of get a full character arc, even though they might not appear as much in the story as the main characters. And the way I see it, if she was simply imploring Romy to do better, that makes us see the character one way. But if she was threatening Romy, then she's absolutely diabolical, considering she too was seeing Samuel, even though we don't know if they were sleeping together specifically. But that leaves us with a whole different taste in our mouths, right? I think, having Esme threaten to tell on Romy if she didn't stop seeing Samuel, while maybe also admitting during the conversation that she too was intimate with him, would have been the most interesting iteration of this particular conversation, right? I think it would have provided an opportunity to examine how sometimes women compete indirectly in these situations, and I think that would have added a great deal of narrative value to this story. Now, I also would have cut the scene where Isabel comes to the country house and begs her mother to come home, right? I would have just had Romy, decide enough was enough and try to come home on her own, right? Realizing that she was wrong and just go, okay, you know what? I'm just going to really, really, really apologize this time. And then maybe have Jacob consider it, but ultimately decide that he couldn't trust Romy in that way anymore, and having him leave her, but maybe feel badly about breaking up the family, right? That's maybe what I would have done in this particular situation, right? And lastly, I think Helena Rain completely let Romy off the hook, big time, because the last few scenes of the film leave me with the impression that, one, Romy may have been intimate with Sebastian before the events of the film, right? They also leave me with the impression that, two, Romy will still be seeking sexual degradation in her free time that she's willing to pay for, just not with a subordinate. And because we leave her at home having a ground-shaking orgasm with her husband in their bedroom, it appears that her reckless behavior didn't cost her anything at all. And that's just the polar opposite of interesting, in my opinion. I would have had Romy and her husband split. Then maybe she could have been spending time with a dom that she was paying to satisfy her kink while splitting custody with the kids. To me, that would have been an ending that would have made much more sense. Now, overall, I would give this movie a 50%. That's a 5.0 if you're thinking IMDb score, which would put the movie just on the right side of decent. But I would not say that this movie was necessarily great, right? Or even very good. Look, this is a film about power and the ways in which power can play a role in interpersonal relationships and even sexual relationships as it pertains to age, gender, and even professional position, which I think is a worthwhile theme to explore, right? Man versus society, in other words, is what we're dealing with here, or woman versus society, however you want to say it, right? Certainly in this day and age, right? I also liked the fact that the boss was the woman here, and the subordinate in this story was the man. I think it made for a much more interesting look at, what could have been the point of this whole tale. But unfortunately, the film seemed too afraid to say what needed saying here, right? That sometimes the things that we want can cause us to destroy ourselves in the way that any kind of addiction can, right? This should not have been a happy story, right? This is a story about addiction, essentially. But the filmmaker tries to force that outcome in a way that feels unrealistic and inauthentic, right? You can tell here that the filmmaker's strategy was merely to use the fact that she was able to convince Nicole Kidman to be the lead in this film, and that the film was super erotic as its selling points, because the story itself was rather circular in nature, right? Romy, the main character, finishes the film seemingly unchanged by everything that she's been through, by everything that she's put her husband through, by everything that she's risked as it relates to her children. And to me, that's just a waste, right? It is my opinion that if you have a main character that doesn't learn anything, that doesn't change somehow, that doesn't grow, then what you also have is a story with no point. And that's what Babygirl really is when you get down to brass tacks, right? And not only does Romy end the film unchanged, but again, I'll say that the cost of Romy's reckless behavior ends up being exactly zero. And that's exactly what we, the audience, get in exchange for the 2 hours that we spent watching this film. But what do you guys think? Have you seen Babygirl yet? If you have, what did you think about Romy's journey from the beginning of the movie to the end? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also support the channel now by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, be sure to go and check out themadscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all on the next video.